So hello everybody and welcome to the Everyday Farmers Conference. We are talking all about ruminants, which are goats and sheep. I am your host, Delaney Drake, and I am so excited today. We have Kimmy Trowbridge and Kate Johnson, and they are going to talk all about milking. And there's the setup, the process, and training the does and the ewes and all that good stuff. So I'm so excited to have them with us, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves so that they can talk a little bit about their farm and their life. So we're going to start with Kimmy, if you're okay with that.
So my name is Kimmy Trowbridge. I have been hobby farming for about 4.5, closer to 5 years. I am very grassroots. I did not grow up on a farm. I have learned everything through communities like this, through Instagram, through YouTube, and through trial and error. The animals are very forgiving in that way. They've been wonderful to me. So I'm by no means an expert, but I have been dabbling in it for the past 4 to 5 years. We're currently in a very big move from Southeast Louisiana to California. So we have a lot of moving parts and trying to move the farm and get all of that set. So my milking season has been a little interrupted this year and a little different, but we're kind of just rolling with the punches. So.
And how many sheep do you have? Sheep and goats do you have?
So I actually have sold my herds in the process of moving. My farm flooded back in May. So everybody was okay, no issues, but we did have to evacuate the animals, which was a very scary, very new experience to us. And in that process, along with my husband getting relocated for work, we're making this move, and it's just very tough on the animals to do a 7 to 10 day travel across country. So I did the best thing for them, which is rehome them, and we'll kind of be starting from scratch all over again once we get out there. So I'm bringing all my farm dogs with me, and I have a few birds I'm bringing with me, but we'll be starting from scratch once we get there.
Wow. How many did you have before? Like, what's the most you've ever had on your property?
So the most I've ever had was 11 goats and 6 sheep.
Okay. Kate, you want to hop on in?
Sure. So I'm Kate Johnson, and I'm out in Longmont, Colorado, which is just outside of Boulder. We've been here on our farm for 15 or 16 years. I also grew up as a city kid, but I rode horses, and I did have a horse, and I lived on a farm during college, and then it took me till I was about 40 to get back to a farm. So we actually started with the horses. That was our whole goal. But because my childhood fantasy was to have as many animals as I could possibly be allowed to have, it was inevitable we would move to some other species. So we started raising dairy goats, I think 12 or 13 years ago, so a couple of years into the farming. And we started just as a 4-H project for my daughters. And I didn't know anything about goats at that time. So I quickly got a mentor. In fact, it was the person who introduced us to goats. I kind of blamed her because she let us bottle feed her baby goats. And I was like, well, I know we're getting goats now. So I'm like, will you come and join 4-H with us? So that's where we really did most of our learning initially. We joined 4-H, and she was our goat project leader. And fast forward, now she and I are co-leaders of a goat club, and we're both superintendents for the goats for the fair. So it gets in you, But I did learn, but you have to do it. Like you can Instagram it all you want, you can Facebook all you want. You got to get in there and do it. But it's really helpful to have a mentor. And I have several mentors. I call them my goat gurus. And I like to be that person for other people. And I always say, if you buy a goat from me, you get me too, because, I have a vested interest in that goat doing well, and I want to help you learn as best I can. So, so we raise Nubian dairy goats now. We actually started out raising mini Nubians, And then my daughter got pretty into showing for a few years, and there weren't really any options for showing miniature goats beyond 4-H in Colorado. So we went with the full Nubians, and we did Nigerian dwarfs for a while, but we just sold our last Nigerian, and we're just sticking with Nubians, although we may re-enter a few of mini Nubians. They're kind of growing in popularity around here. So yeah, so we've had, let's see, we have had probably the most we've had at one time is 20, 25. That's usually including kids in the spring. I try to keep the herd around a dozen does, and we keep 2 bucks. And then we have, you know, always the miscellaneous wethers, the castrated males that just, you know, get into your heart and you can't part with them. So I always say I try to stay around a dozen, but it's never below 16 or 18 because that's just how it goes. And then I also run a cheese making school. So that's kind of what happened to me with the goats. We had milk and I started making cheese, and then eventually I was teaching as a hobby. About 6 years ago, I formally changed my whole career. I was a life coach at the time, and I always say I coached myself out of coaching and became a cheesemaker. So we teach cheese making pretty intensely around here. So that's our other thing, goats and cheese.
Kate, I'm actually, my husband gave me a gift certificate for my birthday to do one of your cheese courses.
Yay!
I've been making some cheese at home, and of course that is very much trial and error when you sometimes they come out great, sometimes they don't. And I told my husband I wanted to actually take some courses. So I'll be seeing you in the next few months once we get settled.
Very good. Well, now we're doing, of course, everything virtually for the time being. So, you know, it's a bit of a downer because I don't get to do the in-person classes, but the good thing is that you can come no matter where you are. So we'll still be doing virtual long after we go back to in-person. It's been very fun to be able to do that. So good. I'm glad.
Yeah, I want to do some too once we get sheep's milk. I actually can't digest anything other than sheep's milk. I've tried goat and I can't. So that's why I was like, I have to wait. But I was like, but I'm planning to take some classes because I definitely want that to be in my back pocket. So how many acres do each of you guys have?
So we have about 5 acres. And so, you know, in this part of the county, we would call this a farm, but for most people, this is, you know, a big yard or a farmette. But we feel like it's plenty for us. If we had, I'm always worried if I had more than that, I would just have way more animals. And so this kind of keeps me limited, keeps me under control.
We're on about 20 acres now, but we're downsizing. We're moving to about 3.
Okay.
So, and I kept animals, when I first started, I was on 2.5 acres. And I had miniature cows and I had goats. I hadn't gotten my sheep yet. So, so I think we'll do okay with the adjustment back down to 3. I'll have to reconsider my herd size this time around, but we're going to downsize a little, and I'm actually looking forward to it. So I think you have the right idea, Kate.
Yeah.
Well, as long as you manage your property well, I mean, it doesn't really matter. I mean, you can really do whatever you want on however many acres you have. You just have to be really, the less acres you have, the more like conscious you have to be of where everybody is, so that they don't overgraze. We're not at that point because we have pastures that aren't being used because we just need to fix the fencing. But we only had one pasture for a while, and that got kind of overgrazed. And then we finally fixed one, and so we moved everybody. But now, like, we have to like build up the grass and the land and stuff because they overgrazed it too much. But it's, you know, you do what you can with what you got. So, so before we get into like the actual milking process, I wanted to have some questions about kind of pre-milking. So this would be like whenever you either bought your sheep, Kimmy, since you're gonna kind of be buying new animals, and Kate, I don't know if you are really buying any now or if you're just kind of you're just using what you have. But when you were buying, what were the things that you guys looked for when it came to dairy animals specifically?
Well, I can go first on that. So when we started, we kind of had something specific we were looking for because we were looking for a breed. We wanted the mini Nubians and we couldn't find that close by. So we did the next best thing. We just got a small Nubian who was going to be bred to a Nigerian dwarf. But because we knew we were going to want to do some showing, one of our criteria was registration. So we did want a registered goat, registered with the American Dairy Goat Association. But I'd say beyond that, my first goat, we probably didn't do a whole lot of, shopping around and looking. And after we started to learn more, I mean, we got lucky with her because although she wasn't a very well-behaved goat, structurally and health-wise conformation, she was a good goat for us to start with because she was on the small side. So she lent herself well to the miniature breed, but she had the components and the background to be able to breed up too. And so several of her daughters and granddaughters have gone on to be quite good show goats in spite of the fact their mother was so tiny. But it's interesting because a lot of what you're looking for in a show goat actually does translate to a good milking goat too, because a lot of the things are structural in showing that are all things that lend themselves well to a good milker, strong straight legs, a good top line, good udder attachment, things like that make them a good show goat, make them a good milker too. And then secondly is reputation of the breeder. So that I think makes a difference. A clean herd, not buying from a herd that isn't doing annual testing and so on. And then factoring in the other factors that you're looking for. And so for me, temperament became a really big one because we're only in the show ring a few times a year. I'm in the milk house every day. And so I don't care how beautiful you are, if you are a difficult to handle goat and you have an unfriendly or a difficult temperament, which Nubians are kind of notorious for having this little stubbornness, that doesn't work well for me. So those are just some of the things that I look for. And then I'll just add one more quick thing, and that is I would like to know if there's any history of mastitis, because some does that are going to freshen with mastitis once are going to freshen every year. You get the occasional, everyone's going to get occasional, but there is a link to that even genetically. A mother who has mastitis a lot is a lot likely to have a daughter that has it a lot. So I would also like to kind of know that history within the herd of the prevalence of problems with that.
Do you look for teat size or like average amount of milk produced per season?
I definitely shape and size of udder makes a big difference to me. I find that the Nubians in general do just have really nice udders, but I have continued to cultivate that. It is one reason I stopped breeding Nigerian dwarfs. They're much more variable in their teat size, and some are milkable by hand, which is how I prefer to milk, and some really just aren't. And there's just a lot more variety. But I have found with the Nubians a little bit less. I mean, there still is variety, but they're all fairly milkable. I do try to breed for what I call milkability. And one of the things, not just the size of the teat, but the size of the orifice. So the hole that the milk comes out of makes a huge difference of how hard it is to milk that doe and how long it takes. And so I like my does that have really big, I call them faucets, they just milk out really fast, and it's a lot easier on my hands and it's just faster.
What about you, Kimmy? What are you looking for in your next flock or herd?
So when I first started, the important things to me were, well, first, the fact that I had never had goats or sheep before. So I very much wanted to get an animal I could handle. I'm 5 feet tall, so I didn't want this great big sheep or goat that I felt like I had to wrestle, because I am doing all of it myself. My husband helps with fence building or any of the grunt work like that, but as far as handling the animals, milking them, I'm on my own for that. So I did my research, and it was also very important living in Southeast Louisiana, where we get temperatures for months on end between 90 and 100 degrees. I knew I needed sheep that were probably hair sheep, not wool, because I wasn't interested in shearing or I was strictly interested in dairy. And with the goats, same thing. I know goats can be a little more hardy, but I wanted something small and something that could definitely survive our summers and our long extended summers. So I wound up with Nigerian dwarfs for the goats and Katahdin sheep. And they both worked out very well for me. I could pick those little goats up and put them right on the milking stand if I needed to. Although once training was done, they knew where the treats were. They were jumping right up on the stand for me. The sheep do not jump like the goats do, and I figured that out real quick. So we had to build a ramp because they were a good bit bigger and not something I could pick up and put on the milking stand. So for me, just handling them, because it was just going to be personal and family use for the milk, I wasn't looking at milk production the first time around, but I can tell you this time around, I will definitely be looking into the Nubians. Just because the little Nigerian dwarfs were great, and I got enough milk for me and my family, and even some to make a little cheese and give to friends and family, but it's a lot of work for a little bit of milk because they are just so much smaller, where my sheep are twice the size, and you milk them once and you get twice the milk production. So just second time around, I will be, although I love the spunkiness of the Nigerian dwarf goats, I will be looking for a bigger sheep. Plus I feel more experienced. I feel like I can handle a bigger animal now. Been through the training, know how to do all that for the most part. So I will be looking for something bigger. But you know, the sheep, I think I'll look into the same breed. I really enjoy the Katahdin.
Yeah, and one thing I might just add to that, Kimmy, since you are small, and you're looking for a small goat, the Nigerians, and, one of the things I think they're more variable, but there are some lines, because Nigerians were the last sanctioned breed by the American Dairy Goat Association. They were getting sanctioned about the time I came into dairy goats, so maybe 10 or 12 years ago. And they just were starting to really cultivate them, I think, in the dairy world. There's just a huge variety. And so there are some Nigerian lines that are incredible milkers. I mean, they have some udders to rival some Nubians, I have seen some Nigerians with more milk than some Nubians, as a whole, the bigger breeds are going to produce more. But if you really loved that breed, I would say don't give up on it. Maybe search out some of these really good, powerful milk lines. Some of them have amazing udders that are very milkable. And then the other thing you might just consider is, if you aren't trying to show goats, or if you have a miniature showing, thing, these crosses that are between Nigerian dwarfs and a full-size goat, where you get a little downsized, but you're still getting more of the good attributes of the big one in a smaller goat. So a couple things just for you to consider, because that's important for you.
That's a great piece of advice, because just between I had a few like matriarchs of my herd, and I could tell one of them was super tiny. She'd give me triplets every year, and her babies were small, and I really couldn't keep them as I started doing more of the milking. Where one of my other matriarchs, she would produce just a bigger goat, and I'm talking just a few inches difference, but their udders were better. So that's a great idea to go for maybe a cross.
Yeah, I mean, truly, you can go from, I had a doe with an eraser sized teat, and then I've seen ones that have, teats that are an adult hand can milk. So it's just a really wide variety. Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, and it also really depends on your location too. Like for us, we didn't have a lot to spend on our first milking herd, and we are not into milk yet, so this is all just big question mark for us. But it was like location. It was like, what was the closest whatever breed we wanted that we could get to, because we didn't have days to spend going off and like getting them. We also we actually ended up getting our lambs instead of full grown animals, because we didn't have any way to transport them other than a minivan. So we grabbed a very large dog crate and got lambs because we're like, they were cheaper. We could get better ones cheaper if you get the babies. And they were the easiest we could transport. So there's a lot to consider when you're buying your first animals. But definitely if you're like when in the advanced tier is to look for those good genes.
Yeah.
So for you guys, when do you guys start training your ewes and does for the stand? Like how old would you suggest starting that?
Do you want to go first this time, Kimmy, so I don't dominate?
Yeah, that's no problem. So I started right away. Actually, my husband just built some milking stands for me, and again, it was just an idea at the time. I bought my goats as babies as well, so I had to wait a whole season. But I started them right away, showing them where the treat trough was, and I actually trimmed their hooves up there. So they were used to me putting them up there. They were used to me handling them, and just kind of knew the routine. Now, the first time I milked them, and I started the first 2 seasons by hand as well, which I do prefer. I have a milking machine now, which I'm sure we'll get into later. But they were not. I guess they were just so used to me handling them, and I spent so much time with them that I really didn't have much of an issue with the goats. Now, my sheep I bought as adults, and same sort of routine. I put them up on the stand. I would show them where their treats were. That's where I trimmed their hooves. And their temperaments were so different. The goats, my goats are full of personality, very spunky. I thought I would have more of an issue with them. The sheep are very mellow, just really calm, and I had a little more trouble with them, maybe because they were adults when I started to milk them. So it took me a little longer to get them. I don't want to use the word like milk stand broke. Like they knew what they were doing and enjoyed getting up on the milk stand. It took me a little longer with the sheep, but I would start from day one.
Yeah, I would kind of agree with that. And it isn't really even starting with milk stand training, it's starting with handling. And so I find, and I know we're going to talk about this at a different conference day, but I find that that decision, at least with goats, between dam raising and bottle feeding does impact down the road, you know, how trainable they're going to be or easy to handle. And I do a combination of all of these things with the bottle feeding, but I do find just handling them in general. So teaching them to lead and wanting to be with you and that you can even catch them are all good. And so I really start my milk stand training with leading, like teaching them to lead. I keep collars on my goats. They're a plastic collar that does have a release link. But from the time they're, you know, pretty young, I mean, they don't start wearing collars till they're maybe 2 or 3 months old, but then I start leading them by their collars because they're just going to have to learn to go from point A to point B. And then, and I do have, I'll put my little share screen on here. I do have one little, a visual of a little train. Let me just put this on. We'll get just that slide. Whoops. I think I just lost you.
Their ears. Their
yeah,
ears
the
are
Nubians.
so...
I know, I'm a sucker for those ears. But this is a doe, a doeling. I'd say she's maybe about 3 months old, 3 or 4 months old here. And that's probably when I really like to start really the training. And I mean, truly, you can do this in 2 sessions and then they totally get it. But when I'm first starting, I want them to learn to jump up and not for me just have to pick them up. And so I just start with a little grain and, you know, I put it up there. Of course, they're interested. They'll put a couple feet in and you just keep moving the grain until they jump up and they're up there. And you do that once or twice and now they'll jump up on the stand. Some better than others. You know, I find that some are just a little bit more stubborn than others. But like Kimmy said, it's not just for milking. So if you're going to have those goats for pets, you still want them to be, you want to stand and you want them to get up there because when you're doing feet, it's so much easier. If you have to give shots, if they have to be treated for something, all of those things, to have them up on a stand and contained and at a level where it's easier for you to reach is really worth it. And I will tell you, I had a doe 1 year that she was dam raised, so she didn't get a lot of handling. And, you know, those teenagers get sort of overlooked for a while, and then she was finally in milk. and we had never trained her to get on the stand, not at least well. It was the worst year ever for milking. I mean, she eventually got it, but it was she was hormonal and she was big and she was heavy, and my husband and I would have to lift her on the stand, and I'm like, I am never waiting this long again. So now I always do train when they're little, because you can lift them up on the stand if they're being stubborn. And then we do feed on the stand, and part of that is nutritionally and part of it is behavioral. Everybody wants to be on the stand now, so there's never a problem to get them up there. That's the problem is if the door happens to be open and everybody gets loose, they're all in the milk house and they're all trying to get on the stand.
Yeah.
I've got some.
So I would just reiterate, starting with just handling.
Yeah. Our sheep love us, but we don't have a stand yet just because we couldn't afford it. And I'm at the point where I'm like, we need one now because we haven't done any training, and we should have started probably months ago. So I'm like, I have a homework to do. So for you guys, I know there's kind of not controversy, but I know some people like to keep their kids and their lambs on their moms for a certain time after birth. Some people pull it off immediately. At what point do you guys pull the babies off the mom so you can milk?
Let's see, am I frozen to you or can you see me?
You're frozen.
Frozen.
Okay, I'm frozen for me too, and I don't exactly know why. So why don't you go, Kimmy, and I'll try to get unfrozen.
Okay. So I think because everybody is milking for different reasons, like I said, I'm more hobby, family and friend use. I don't sell my milk. So for me, I don't want to bottle feed unless I have to. And I have had to every season with at least one baby. My smallest female always gave me triplets. And she did a great job, but one of them always needed some sort of supplemental feeding. So for me personally, I would wait a little longer, and I would keep the babies with mama and let her do the hard work. I would be there to assist if needed. And then around 6 weeks, I would start separating the mama during the day, the baby. And the mama would be free to graze, and the baby played in what I called the nursery with all the other babies. And, at that point, I would start milking her once a day. And then eventually, as time went on and the babies got a little bigger and they were eating on their own, I would start milking mama twice a day. So that's just what worked for me. But I waited a little longer because I did not need that milk right away for any kind of, because I was selling it or making a good that was going to be sold. It was just for personal use. And it was really for my benefit so that I didn't have to bottle feed a whole bunch of babies.
So I don't know where I am. Can you hear me, Delaney?
I can hear you. I just can't see you.
Can't see me. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to sign off real quick and come back on. Sometimes Zoom does this, so you'll have to let me back in from the waiting room. So hopefully I'll be right back.
Okay. So Kimmy, for your schedule, do you do sheep and goats at the same time, or like with the same schedule, or are they a little off? Okay.
No, I do it at the same time. Most I have milked at any given season has only been 6, which is a lot for one person. Again, I don't have any help. Nobody else helps me milk the animals. I did wind up getting a machine.
I know. I don't know. I've never had it stay stuck like this, so I don't quite know what is going on.
Trying to see if there's anything on my end I can do.
All right. Well, I might be able to dial in on my phone too and see if that'll work. Sorry about that, but technology is so great when it works and so frustrating when it doesn't. Anyhow, I can answer some of that, or I can let Kimmy keep talking while I try to figure out how to get me back on your screen.
It's up to you, Kimmy. Do you have anything more to say about the
No, just that I milk them all at the same time. Especially once I got into AM and PM milkings, I would do the goats first and then put them back in their pen. As Kate had said, like the last thing you want to do is leave the milking parlor open, because then you've got goats and sheep and everybody. I had 3 stands and everybody was jumping on all 3 stands, and it gets crazy. So I would do my goats first. I'd put them up, and then I would get my sheep out and I would do them. Because I was using a milking machine, I also had to wash and sanitize before I started with the sheep's milk. So it wound up being a long process, about an hour to get everybody done from start to finish, AM, PM. So it was worth it, but I mean, I'm sure there's probably better solutions out there for that. There you
Okay.
are, Kate.
So now I have to mute this. Hold on. So we don't have. All right.
All right. Can you hear me okay now?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see if I turn the, no, I'll just be sideways. Okay. So let me answer that the best I can. Let me turn this down. I'm getting double sound. Can you still hear me?
Yes, and you're not echoed. You were, but you're not now.
Okay, so I would just say, as far as that decision about whether to bottle feed or dam raise and all that, like Kimmy said, sometimes you don't have a choice, so you better be ready to do it either way. And I sometimes do have to do one or the other. You know, you have a doe that rejected them, or you have a baby that was too weak and you have to do it. And then sometimes I have a doe that, you know, she's sick or something. So sometimes you have to do it. But a lot of times I want to do some bottle feeding at some point, because I am going to get a friendlier baby. But I really do like to keep mamas and babies together as much as I can. So even if I am going to bottle raise them, I won't do it right from the get-go. I will, if I can let them be dam raised, I will leave them with the dam for at least the first 2 weeks, because I just feel like everybody settles in better if hormonally mama can be mama and babies can bond to mama. And then I kind of start to gradually transition them based on what works for me. You know, it isn't always just about what's best for the goat. I mean, obviously health-wise, I want them to be happy, but they also have to fit in my life, you know, and sometimes it's just not, I'm too busy. I can't bottle raise all these babies. Moms, you're doing a great job. Go for it. You know, like right now I have 4 milkers and I really just don't need that much milk right now. We're not doing cheese classes in person, so I don't need nearly as much milk. I've just left one baby on one of the moms because I'm like, you're doing a great job. You guys are happy. I don't have to milk and I don't have to feed you then. And he really should be weaned now, but then I have another goat to milk. So, all right, let me just set this here. I do have a funny little echo, so it's a little distracting. Was that the main question we were answering?
Yes. It was kind of
I got distracted because of my video problem.
Yeah, for me, we got our sheep from a dairy that just immediately pulled off the lambs because they sold them, but they also were turning their milk immediately into a product. So it was a little bit more like, no, we need every single drop of milk for our business. And so I know that because Kimmy's not a business, but Kate, you are. I was just curious as to be like, you know, a lot of home people or like homesteaders will choose to kind of let mom stay. A lot of times they're like, they just feel like mom just needs some baby time. You know, we ask a lot of them and, you know, they should be able to enjoy their babies. Whereas, you know, the business side is like, no, these are animals. We have them for a purpose and they need to be used for that. So there's 2 different kind of sides. And Kate, you seem to kind of be in the middle of doing kind of both, which is really nice.
Yeah. And I would say
all of them.
And part of that is because although I am a business, the milk production isn't really part of my business model. You know, the cheese making school is really the business, and we're not dependent on that milk because we're teaching students to use all kinds of milk. Not all, most of my students don't have dairy animals, so sometimes we're working with grocery store milk. So I do get it. If milk production is, or whatever it is that you would need to separate the babies, is your number one business model, you're going to have to make that sustainable. But for me, that isn't really so much a factor. And, you know, I do also just find that sometimes for the health, one way or the other, one is better or the other. And so I'm just pretty flexible with that. And I believe that everybody's circumstance is different. So, but I do think that for me personally, because these are as much pets as they are part of my business, I do just like to take the mom's lead a little bit. And I have some moms that are perfectly happy to let me raise their babies. You know, they're good moms, but they're not over attached. And then I have other moms, there's just no way I'm ever pulling a baby from that mom. It would upset her so much that it's not worth it to me to do that, you know? And so I let the moms kind of tell me what works for them. They all at some point are like, yeah, you take them for a little while. I'm going out to the pasture.
I was like, as a mom, I was like, I understand that. I'm a mom of little ones specifically. So before we get into the actual like process of the milking, I have one last question, and this has more to do with any notice in production quality or milk quality, or the amount of milk produced. Do you guys see a different? Oh, I hear an echo.
Yeah, I've got to do something here. Sorry. All right. Can you still hear me now without the echo?
Let me see. Yeah, okay, we're good. Do you guys see a difference whether it's the weather affecting milk production or taste, or like nutrition? I know that I've read that like certain herbs, if you feed them to the animals, that it'll change the taste of their milk. Do you guys do anything, whether it's feed or just when weather gets crazy, to help keep you guys' production kind of at the same level, if that makes sense?
Yeah, it makes sense, but if I can be honest with you, I haven't gotten that in depth in the milking process. I've done seasons, but I couldn't really tell you that I fed them something different that made the milk taste different, or I fed them something that produced way more milk for these few weeks because I was feeding them XYZ. I've heard the same things. I just haven't had the opportunity to actually experiment with that.
Yeah, I know that's kind of sort of a next level.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, you know, I often talk about flavors of milk. Are you hearing me okay now?
Yes.
Okay. I just switched to putting a new earbud in because I find the sound quality is a little better. So yeah, I find, again, like things do change, you know, what they're eating, but I'm less concerned about the flavor of the milk than I am the health of the dough and the milk production. So ideally, and again, you know, there's always, in an ideal world, this is what I would do, but life doesn't always give you the ideal scenario. So for me, I do find that feeding alfalfa has many benefits when they're in milk. You know, it's higher in protein and higher in sugars. So it's both going to give them more milk production and better body composition. And because it's sweeter, it also gives like a little sweeter flavored milk, you know, but I can't always get alfalfa. So when I can't get alfalfa, when the farmers around here are just out of it, then I'm feeding grass hay because that's what I have. And then I will supplement that grass hay with a lot more grain and alfalfa pellets. And again, it isn't so much because I'm worried about the flavor of the milk than it is that they need those calories and that nutrition to keep in good shape and to keep producing milk. So sometimes I find that what affects flavor kind of goes hand in hand with what I have to do here nutritionally. You know, we're in a very dry area. we have good pasture for about 2 months of the year. And then we're just down to pretty much nothing. No matter what we would do for herd management, even if I had one goat on my property, we couldn't pasture feed exclusively because we just don't have that kind of rainfall. So we're going to be supplementing, and it's just a matter of what we supplement. I will say one thing people don't always know when they're getting into goats is how much different the milk tastes depending on the breed of the goat. And even though it is a bit of a generalization, not all goat milk tastes the same if they were all eating exactly the same. And so the Nubians and Nigerian dwarves are known for that little higher quality in terms of butterfat and flavor. It's a little bit sweeter. But there are other breeds that also have nice milk. So I don't mean to diss the other breeds. It's just those two breeds are really known for that flavor difference in the milk.
Okay, great. So I know Kate, you showed us what stand you milk on, which is a metal, correct?
Yes, although I have both. And so unfortunately, now that I'm on the phone, I can't show you those pictures anymore. So I can keep messing with this and see if I can get the computer to work again. But we started with just a wooden stand, and it was just a little stand that my husband and my daughter built from plans they found online. And that stand is still to this day one of my favorite little stands. It's small, it's light, it's just, the goats can jump up on it easily. It works just great. And so really we went to the metal stand more because I was getting bigger goats and our wooden stand was pretty short, and it was short this way. And so some of my big does couldn't quite fit on it. And then also when we were showing a lot, we just needed something that we could fold down. And so the metal stand, tucks all in and it has wheels, and it just was a lot easier for going to shows. But truly, I don't have a preference either way. I think in my dream, I would have an aluminum stand. They're really expensive, but they're so lightweight that for traveling, they're much nicer than the metal stand or a wood stand. But truly for me, I don't have a huge preference either way. It just depends on what you need to do with the stand besides milking.
What about you, Kimmy? What do you use?
I have wooden stands. They're currently packed in a pod headed to California right now. But my husband found plans online as well, and for us it was a cost thing. He said, do a few seasons of milking, make sure you like this before we invest. But he built me those stands and they've been great. And the head catch is tall enough that I was able to put my buck on the stand to trim his hooves, so it's about as tall as my sheep. So it was an easy transition. Once I got them, they could go on the same stands. He sealed the wood, so it was very easy for me to just hose down to clean. And it was the right height for me. And the goats could jump up easily, and the sheep, I just put a little step or ramp, and they just walk up and get on. So I do all wooden.
And do you guys milk indoors or outdoors?
I do mostly indoor. Where I'm at now, I will probably switch to outdoor because where I'm at now, rainfall, especially between the months of like April and November, it's raining every day almost. So just depending, and I've been out there with an umbrella, raincoat, because they have to be, when you're in a situation like that, you can't say, sorry, it's raining, I'm not milking you today. So we did move them into a garage, and that has worked out so much better. But I think where we're going will probably be mostly outside.
Okay, and I think I figured out I can screen share because I am actually still on the computer, even though you can't see me on the computer. So I'll bring up a little picture to show you where I milk. So when we first started, we have a big barn, which I don't have a picture of, and we milked in the big barn. So here's just a picture of, this is my little wooden stand that is ancient and we still use all the time. And then here's this bigger stand that's just a little bit easier to get around. But this is a picture of my milk cow house now. I love my little milk house so much. But what we always milked in our big barn, and the problem was it was just so dusty in there, and there were so many birds, and there were mice, and there were flies, and there was just no way to control it. And so I found that, it was a little harder to have as clean of milk as I'd like, but also just the conditions. So I just longed for a milk house. And I'll just play this little video so you can see. It's kind of a funny little video of a quick little milking session, but it'll get you to see the inside. So my daughters, we actually just bought this shed kit from, Home Depot or Lowe's, and my daughters and her friends built it over a weekend. And it's just a shed, but I love it so much because I can keep it clean, and I have only milking stuff in there, and I can keep the flies under control and keep the birds out and keep the mice to a minimum. But it is indoors. So like Kimmy said, if it's raining or snowing, or it's dark or what have you, it's really nice to have a place, that you can go indoors. And also because I have electricity out here, I also can have a heater when it gets really cold, and I can have a fan in there. I have lights, so I can milk at night. So I do really like the milking indoors part of things. I will milk outside on occasion because we do take our goats to a lot of demonstrations, and then we just pack up a stand, and wherever we are, they're getting milked. But definitely indoor milking is much more convenient because all your stuff can be in there then.
So you guys,
so this is my little doe salsa, just showing how quick she is to milk.
she's very fast. I was looking at that bowl, and I was like, wow, that's a lot of milk in just a few seconds.
Yeah. My husband doing this, and I'm like, I timed it. I'm like, that was 2.5 minutes to milk one doe. So that's what I'm always looking for, is that really fast. And she's not a huge producer. She was a first freshener this year, so she'll produce a lot more in subsequent years, but really fast to milk, which is really nice.
So do you guys milk one at a time then?
Definitely I do, because there's only me and 2 hands. And so I milk by hand. So there's no reason to get multiples in there, because I can only milk one at a time since I don't use a machine.
When I was doing it by hand, I would do one at a time with the goats and the sheep, and then in the machine, I have the capability of doing 2 at a time. So that's expedited things a little bit. So, but I do like the machine, and I like the time it saves me, but the time it saves you milking, you spend that time on sanitation. So, cleaning the hoses and the couplets and the actual milk container and all of that. So you do save time on some of the hand milking, but then you spend it cleaning, a lot of time cleaning.
Yeah, that is so true. And, in general, the people that I hang out with goats, we say if you're milking, 5 or 6 or fewer, it's probably going to be faster to milk by hand because of that setup and cleanup time. Mm-hmm. And so since I'm almost never milking more than that, I might have a dozen does, but I'm usually only having in milk 6 to 8 max. This year I had 5. Then I sold one, so I have 4, and then sometimes you leave a baby on. I've just never reached that threshold where time-wise it really makes sense. And then the expense of a machine, a really good machine, is an expensive investment. And then also I find that, at least for my experience and what I've researched, I think hand milking is a little bit gentler on their udder, and you're going to have probably a longer life for that udder by hand milking. And then from a cheese making perspective too, you have fewer places for contamination to happen if you are wanting to use your milk raw, because the machine, yes, you're sanitizing it and you're doing all those good things, but there's so many little nooks and crannies and so many places where bacteria can get, or listeria or other things, that you run a little bit more of a risk. Or if you are putting sanitizing solution in there, that's kind of undoing some of the benefits of the raw milk too. So I think there's a lot of really good things about hand milking, But that said, if I had does that were really hard to milk by hand, like if I really did have a little big herd of Nigerians and they were as hard to milk as my original Nigerian was, I'd go to a machine. Or if you had, so many goats that you needed to be able to do multiples at one time, or if you decide to be, professional creamery and you have to have a closed loop system because that's a requirement, there are places for milking machines by all means. Or, even for some older owners who just are getting arthritis in their hands and perhaps they really just can't milk by hand anymore. So I'm never in the camp of like, it's only one way and never the other way. But I think for a lot of people, and Kimmy, you brought it up beautifully, it sometimes takes longer, even though the milking itself is shorter, because there's just a lot more involved. I can milk 4 does in 15 minutes. It tops, from top to bottom, because it's just in and out. Like I don't have any equipment to bring out there and I don't have anything to clean up at the end, So
I can tell you my animals prefer the hand milking, and I can have more of a feel for, is the udder drained? It like you said, it's more gentle on their udders. I've only used the machine one season, but they prefer when I hand milk them.
Yeah, and I think there's also, this kind of goes back to what we were talking about with the leaving moms and babies together. I think there is just, for a lot of us that are doing this on a really small scale as a hobby, a lot of it is that bond that we have with the animals. And I'll tell you, you get really bonded to those animals that you're hand milking. I'm not saying you don't get bonded if you're using machine, but somehow that mechanization and having that distance between you can miss things. Like I can pick up little things that change in the udder because I'm feeling the teat, I can feel if there's some little growth in there, or if it's drying out, now it needs more moisture. And I think that we just, we get a lot closer, I think, because of it. So I do feel like, I'm definitely swayed toward the hand milking side of things for a whole bunch of reasons. And but I would never rule out a milk machine in certain conditions.
Yeah, I agree.
In the video I saw, Kate, I didn't see any sanitizing of the teeth. Do you normally do that or no?
Yeah, I do. And I don't even know why in that video I didn't, although I really kind of vary on that a little bit. And I'll show you, I'll show that at another stage, but yeah, usually what I do, and I think because that one I was kind of trying to be as fast as possible, so I skipped that little part, but usually what I do is I clean the udder first. And I'm either I don't do a dip. I just find that the dip, it's just messy, and I inevitably it gets kicked over and I spill stuff. And so I use the wipes, the little udder wipes that have a little sanitizing on them. And then I can also rub them around the whole udder and the bottom of the belly to get any loose hairs, since I am milking by hand. And then of course I always run out of the udder wipes, the ones that are using for that. So then I just buy baby wipes, and I'll buy the unscented, fragranced ones. And sometimes I'll spray the udder a little bit with the udder spray and then use the wipe. But a lot of times I'm really just trying to get the dust down. And then I milk out the first few squirts into a cup to dispose of, because that's where most of the germs are, is in those first few squirts. And then at the end, I do spray with an udder spray. And I prefer that over the dip. For one thing, it's a little bit neater. But it also is a cold spray, and some of the does have to learn to get used to it. But the coldness of the spray also helps to close the orifice better than the dips would. So the dips will get some of that antibacterial up into the udder and give some protection, but then your orifice is still open. And because I have does with pretty big orifices, I do like the spray because that coldness kind of helps to close it up a bit before they go back out in the pasture or into the, paddock area. So that's kind of my typical routine.
What about you, Kimmy? Do you
have a very similar Yeah, I've had a very similar routine. I've used wipes before, and those are great. As I said before, we get clean, so sometimes our pastures get muddy. So for me, sometimes I really have to get in there and clean their rear legs and tail and everything because it can. So I've done the wipes. I've done the spray. I really like the spray. It's just the solution I had bought and mixed it. I spray it on them and I wipe them down very good. This year we had more of a dry year, so it was very easy. Not as not as much to clean. But the season before that, between the milking stand, the goats, and the sheep, it was it was a big process to actually get them clean enough to where they were ready to milk. And then I do the same thing. I works, and then I'm ready to milk, and then clean them afterwards.
How often do you guys clean the actual stand that you're milking on?
I'm probably less good about that than I should be. But usually if we have had rain and snow and they're coming in with really muddy feet and it's getting noticeably dirty, then I'm going to clean it at least, after everybody is milked or sometimes in between them just to get the big stuff off of there. And then I do clean it. I had this one wether that had a terrible case of thrush that he developed somewhere else. And I took him back just to get him back into health. And because that's very contagious, I did sanitize in between him being up there and the other does. But I don't typically, because I'm not doing any kind of milk sales and I don't do raw milk most of the time, I don't sanitize in between sessions. I know that if you are a commercial operation and if you're doing a lot of that, you clean is everything. I mostly try to keep the big stuff off of it. So mud and, manure and that kind of stuff. I use a broom and get that off after every session.
Agreed. I'm not cleaning it every day. Sessions. It is mostly out of necessity. Again, if it's been really rainy, then I'm cleaning it a few times a week. But other than that, I just make sure the stand is tight.
That's great. You guys, so I saw you, I think from what I've researched, stainless steel is the best thing to milk into because it's supposed to be the easiest to clean, correct?
Yeah, I mean, in general, I think that is the preferred thing. Again, it depends a little bit on what you're going to do with your milk. So if you are going to use it raw, you may decide that you like the idea of something you can sanitize. There's a lot of differing thoughts on even that, even within the cheese making world. Some people really believe that wood is better for all of these things like they used to do. But I would say, most of your dairy producers or dairy industry advisors would say stainless steel. But because I also do pasteurize my milk a lot of the time before I make cheese with it, and that's just something that I do as a kind of personal preference thing, I don't worry quite as much. Sometimes I'm storing the milk in a food safe plastic jug in between, but I have those nice little flat stainless steel pails, which I just picked up at a goat show from somebody that was selling their old stock. I've never seen them for sale. I don't know where to get those flat pans that I have. And I love them just because they're wider than some buckets. And so in terms of aim, I have some doughs that have a pretty wide teat placement, and it can be really hard to get into a little bucket. And then because I've had some shorter doughs, some of those buckets are just too tall to fit under that dough. And so I like the shape of that more so than the stainless steel nature of it. But I would say that probably from a dairy industry standard, stainless steel is preferred.
What do you use, Kimmy?
Yeah, I've always used stainless steel, and then I switch to glass mason jars when I go inside. I don't pasteurize my milk. I'm not distributing it, so it's always been something. I just milk in stainless steel, switch to glass. I have run into issues between my sheep and my goats because some of my goats are so short. In fact, I have one in particular who I could hardly use the machine on because the couplets would be hitting the ground and her teat at the same time. So, but when I use the machine, it goes into a big stainless steel bucket.
So Kate, since you said you do pasteurize, do you just do it on the stove, or do you have a machine that does it for you?
I have both. So I have a machine that will do 2 gallons at a time, which isn't a lot. You know, we're pretty small, and so that's fine. And then sometimes if I'm just doing a gallon, I just do it stovetop.
Yeah, I think we were able to acquire a little bit of sheep's milk from some farm, and I self-pasteurized, and I think I did it wrong the first time because I ate something and I was like, that didn't sit well with me, and then I like researched it more and I was like, I did that wrong, and so I had to do it a second time. And I was like so glad that I didn't do it all in one batch, because I was like, obviously I didn't know what I was doing. So I the first batch wasn't great, but the second batch I was like, I think I did this better because it was better on my stomach. But that's kind of like
Interesting.
the kind of fluctuation of whether to pasteurize or not, you know, because like raw, you know, I know that there's controversy on that too, but like if you don't know what you're doing for pasteurizing, like that can cause just as many issues as like
For sure.
the raw. So
yeah, I mean, one of the big reasons that I pasteurize is because when I was doing in-person classes, we were sharing a lot of, you know, cheese samples and, you know, and even tasting milk. And because the raw milk, pasteurized milk thing is controversial, and in my state, you know, there's a lot of legalities around it. And it should be an informed decision that people should really knowingly go into it, understanding. I found that it was a little bit easier for me not to have to worry as much about getting consent and, you know, and making sure people understood, or if somebody was there. I mean, raw milk can be dangerous for pregnant women, and I might have had people in my class that were pregnant and didn't even know they were pregnant. So I just found that it was a little bit of a safety thing, you know, because I was sharing so much with the public and because of my state's laws. But that said, you know, I think when you have your own animals and you know how things are going, I mean, I used to joke, and my daughter used to get really mad when I would say this, but she used to do the milking when they were her goats, and I wasn't out there, so I didn't know what was going on in the milk house, you know, like, is that hoof going in the pan? And I didn't know. And that, you know, so I always kind of felt like, oh, this is a little insurance policy, even for our family, because I wasn't the one milking. But I say that tongue in cheek, you know, I think a lot of people just kind of believe that one side or the other is always right. And you'll see I'm often very much in the middle on things, that I find that not all raw milk will kill you, and not all raw milk is good for you, right? Because it depends so much on the health of the animal and how you're milking and how quickly you use the milk and how you're handling the milk in between. That and similarly, pasteurized milk is not always safer, and there's post-pasteurization contamination, and in some ways pasteurized milk is less safe because it doesn't have the good bacteria to combat something that's bad. So I think we should never use blanket statements on either side, and it does become something you should just be really knowledgeable about and understand before you make your decision on either side.
yeah.
And then sometimes it's not a one size fits all. I make raw milk cheeses, I make pasteurized milk cheeses. But if I am going to make a raw milk cheese or drink my milk raw, I'm going to make sure that it's as fresh as possible, because that's how raw milk was intended. You know, it wasn't intended to be milked out of the animal, put into a jar, put in the refrigerator, transported places, you know, and then 2 weeks later somebody drinks it. I mean, we didn't get sick from raw milk when we had our own dairy animals and we were drinking the milk or making the cheese the day we milked. The problems came when we are handling raw milk differently than we used to. And that's when pasteurization kind of became a lifesaver. I mean, literally. And yet there's really benefits on both sides. So I think being very well versed in and understanding it is a good idea.
Yeah, I was a history major, and I just remember them saying that when Louis Pasteur came up with the process, that the milk maidens never got sick because they were constantly drinking probably straight from the source or as close to it as possible. And they were just around the bacteria, so their body got used to it. And so they were always, there was always that like, well, why are they not getting sick while everyone else is? So that was kind of a very interesting point too, from just going directly from the animal and doing it in a clean environment to, directly into your body, being a little bit, the less time, the less things that could affect the milk is better when it's coming straight from there and doing it raw.
Exactly.
So for you guys, if one of you guys could kind of explain what mastitis is, and then also talk about maybe how you guys deal with it when it comes up, or if there's any other health issues that you've come across with your animals where you had to kind of handle it a little differently or even dry them out.
Mm-hmm. Well, I can start. I do have a little screen share thingy on the mastitis too. So let's just see if we can get that up. Let's see. All right. Can you see that okay?
Yes.
So for mastitis, it's an infection, and it's mostly caused by poor hygiene. So that's the main thing. But you can get subclinical mastitis. So there's mastitis that shows symptoms, and we all think of that, and especially if you ever were a lactating mother yourself and ever had mastitis, you knew it was, heat and discomfort and, sometimes engorgement and really uncomfortable. And so for your does, when you wait till it gets to that state, it can be lethal. I mean, they can die from it. Certainly it's really uncomfortable. And so the key with mastitis is preventing it. You don't want it to get to that stage. So this little kit right here, the California mastitis test, everybody that has dairy animals should have. Although it has a picture of a cow on it because everything is geared to cows. You can use it for goats and I assume sheep too. I don't know for sure because I don't know anything about sheep. But this is going to pick up those subclinical cases of mastitis. And that's where they're not showing any symptoms because it's at a low level and you can treat it and get rid of it before it's caused any harm to your doe. And I always thought I didn't ever have mastitis because I've never had a clinical sign of it. Then we started doing raw milk tests because we were starting to use our milk raw, and we started picking up some interesting things that I was like, what is this? And I started doing the CMT test more regularly, and I found that occasionally we are having some subclinical mastitis, which is very common. And it was never turning into full-blown mastitis, but doesn't mean it couldn't have. And so there are some things you can pick up when you test this, and it's pretty simple to use. You're just, squirting some milk into the little cups. You put some of the solution in. If it turns into a gel-like substance, and that can even be varying how gel-like it gets, but then you might see, okay, we've got some subclinical mastitis here. Let's treat it. So this is the product that I usually treat with if I do pick up one of these subclinical cases. It's a mammary infusion called Today, and there's another one called Tomorrow. I love those names. So today, you use Today when you find mastitis in your milking doe. Tomorrow, you would use after you're drying your doe off, like right as you're going through the drying her off and she's just about, this is the final milking. You would put a little bit of this up into the teat to prevent mastitis next year. So that's why it's called Tomorrow, because it's a preventative. And this is an antibiotic, and so you do have to pull the milk. There is, I think, a 96-hour withdrawal time. And so you don't want to be drinking or selling that milk. But catching it early like that is by far better than waiting till it shows up as symptoms. So I do try to do a CMT test about once a week on my does. It's just fast, it's cheap, it's easy, and it just gives me an idea of how things are going. I definitely do it on the days I'm going to use the milk raw, because I would like to know that before I use the milk raw, and this is quick feedback. And then this is the spray I was talking about that I use, the Fight Back spray. So a lot of preventing mastitis first comes in a healthy herd. You know, like I said at the beginning of this, if you have a doe that has freshened with mastitis once, she's going to probably freshen again with mastitis. So trying to have healthy stock that isn't prone to mastitis. But then it becomes, you know, keeping your pens relatively clean, making sure you've got clean hands when you're milking, and cleaning your hands between milking the different does in your line. And then making sure that you are spraying or disinfecting at the end of the milking is probably the very most important thing, in my opinion, because this is where we're closing up that orifice before you send them back out, where there's inevitably going to be poop, right? And dust and all those things. So that's my little quick spiel on mastitis. I'm sure Kimmy has some things to add to that. Let me unshare here. There we go.
So I found that pretty interesting, Kate, because I was getting ready to say we've never had mastitis. I know it's not a matter of if, I know it's seasons. So far, in about 4 seasons, I haven't had any, like you said, anything that's presented where I say, oh no, she's sick. I'm pretty sure my vet thinks I'm a hypochondriac when it comes to my goats and sheep, because I've called them out for just about everything because they are my pets. But I haven't seen that yet. But I find that very interesting that you can test and that they'll present with symptoms without even knowing. So that's something I'm going to look into.
Yeah, for sure. I would say I probably went through about 4 seasons too, thinking like, aren't we lucky? We've never had mastitis, right. You know? Yeah. And and our local vets would always say, oh, you've had it. It's just been subclinical. It's never turned into much more than that. And so it was really just, like I said, not till we started doing the raw milk tests. And that's good. If you haven't had it that full blown case, that means that whatever you're doing is working, and that's good. But it's also, you know, inevitable that someday something's going to happen. So it's good to have this. It's also just good to have this test kit. I mean, it's all of like, I don't know, $20 or something to have, because sometimes something shows up wonky in your milk and you're not sure what it is. And this is at least something you can quickly get an answer before you have to call the vet, you know. Because one thing you will learn if you are trying to have livestock on your own, you will spend a small fortune on vet calls if you don't start figuring out how to do a lot of it yourself. And so before you call the vet for something that looks like something's going on with your milk or with your udder, if you just have this little kit there and you can self, you know, diagnose, or at least be able to say, I did a mastitis test and it was clear, that has already ruled out something that your vet then needs to charge you for when they come.
That is so true.
So for the subclinical, because I know if it's full-blown mastitis, it does affect the taste of the milk. For the subclinical, have you ever noticed a difference in taste when it's not full-blown?
You know, not really, but we are also, especially in that time when I wasn't testing, we were pasteurizing at that time. So you are going to kill some things in there. We're also filtering, so you're filtering some level of it. But I actually wrote an article on mastitis recently I write for Goat Journal, and I had interviewed my vet for the article, and she said, yeah, even though it might not harm you because you're pasteurizing the milk, you know, basically mastitis is, you know, it's pus. And I mean, it's things like that. And like, even if it wouldn't hurt you, like, do you want that in your milk? You know, it's kind of doesn't sound very palatable. So, you know, the big producers are going to always have some mastitis in their herds, and they're triple filtering and pasteurizing and all of that. But I would say when it's subclinical, I wouldn't think you would notice a lot of difference, but you can notice some little things that maybe things aren't setting up in your cheese making. You know, your coagulation isn't setting up quite right, and you're like, is something going on with that milk right now? So again, it's good to have, but I think most of us probably wouldn't perceive it at that really low level.
And so for our audience who may not know, you mentioned filtering your milk. That's basically you milk your goat or your sheep, and you take the raw milk and you just put it through just some sort of like mesh, correct?
Yeah, so there are filters that are, it's a little disc, and you'll have, in fact, I think here I can show that video again with the milk house real quick, because let's find it here, because I do show that at the end. I'll just kind of fast forward through this. So let me just get to the point where I'm dumping out the milk. So right there, you can see what I have here is a stainless steel jug, and then this is my filter system. And then there are little filters, and I don't think I show it up close here, but there's a little paper filter that's in that filter that's specific for milk. A coffee filter won't do it. You have to get those milk filters. And it's a one-use thing, although I will use one filter for all the milking that morning until it starts to get clogged up with butterfat, which does happen, and you might have to replace the filter. Yeah, so that's getting out the big stuff. You know, that's getting out hay and dust and hair. That's not, it has nothing to do, your milk's still completely raw, you know, in there. And so anything that's at a microbiological level is still in there. But you're filtering out the big stuff.
Kimmy, do you use something similar?
I do, but I wanted to ask Kate, is that a llama in the background?
Yes, we use a guard llama instead of dogs. I know you have guardian dogs. Yeah, so that's my cool dude, Seeger. He's been with those goats a long time. He's funny. Yeah, when I sell goats, I sold like 5 or 6 goats at one time. And when they left, oh my gosh, you could see him out there counting, and he's humming, and he's like, where'd they go? I'm counting goats here, and there's a whole bunch missing. So he's funny.
I do. I use a filter as well, but because like Kate said, it's catching the big stuff, any loose hair, dirt, things like that. It's I just use like a metal, it looks like a really close-knit grate, and it'll catch the big stuff.
So are there, before I move on to some of the storage and the use of the milk, are there any other health issues that people who are milking need to keep an eye out for, or as mastitis kind of the big one?
Well, if you're using the milk raw, I really think it's a good idea if you can, like once a month, do a raw milk panel where they're looking for a lot of things. I mean, they're looking for E. coli and coliforms and some other things. And these are things that both are health, related to you, but they're also related to your dough. So they're looking at somatic cell counts and things like that. So I feel like that's probably a pretty good idea to do on a monthly basis, especially if you're drinking the milk raw, but doing it at least on occasion just to get an idea. And it is a snapshot in time, so it's not always telling you what's going on, and things change through the season and all of that. But I do think it's a good idea to at least do it a few times so that you have an idea of what's going on in that milk. Not everybody does. And I didn't this year test because I'm just pasteurizing my milk because I wasn't selling milk. When I do sell milk, we have a herd share model here that we can do a raw milk CSA. And then I do start testing when I'm sharing it with other people raw.
And is that test through the state or the county?
No, we have a vet school about an hour from here that used to do the raw milk panel, and they don't anymore, but up in that same town, which is about an hour from here, there is a lab. It's an independent lab that does it. So we have kind of a cooperative of small dairy people that take turns driving everybody's samples up there once a month, so that we don't have to all make that drive ourselves.
Is there a special way you need to store the samples?
Yeah, they're not super picky about it. So as long as you get them enough milk there, they'll test it. But there are some little vials. I think I actually have one here. I could probably show you in my clutter of an office. Let me see if I can find it. Anyhow, I have these things that are specifically for that. No, I don't see them. that would be too wishful thinking that I would actually know where something was. Anyhow, there is a little plastic vial that's actually intended for that. So that's what I send mine up in. But I've seen people just put them in glass jars and send it up that way. It's cooled, chilled.
Kimmy, have you ever done any testing to that extent?
I have not, and I know state by state, of course, every state is different, and some you're allowed raw milk and you can sell it and it's not a problem. I know just the state over in Mississippi, you can have raw milk if your herd is, I believe, under 11. It's a, or maybe 9. It's a number. Now, I don't know if the herd is bigger than that. It's illegal, but in Louisiana, you can't have raw milk at all. So again, I don't distribute or sell my milk right now. So I have not done any testing. Where I'm heading though, in California, it is allowed. So
Right.
if I choose to distribute my milk there, then definitely I would be doing testing.
Tennessee has the herd share, but there's people in the state that are constantly trying to get rid of that. And for the people in the audience who don't know what herd share is, it's basically someone who wants some of your milk or some of your farm products that they want directly from the farm. And so in a way, it's like they're kind of buying half your animal or half your farm, or however you guys do the contract, to where they can get a certain amount of your milk because they technically own part of your herd.
Right. That's how ours. Go ahead.
No, go ahead, Kimmy, or go ahead, Kate.
I was just gonna say, that's kind of how our model works. Ours is only for the milk itself. We don't have it for other milk related products. And it's a boarding contract. So you're actually paying a monthly fee to board your animal on my farm, and I'm going to milk it for you and give you your milk. So that's kind of how they've gotten around this legality of selling raw milk. We're not selling raw milk. We're just giving you your milk from your animal that you co-own with me.
Yeah, but technically you're the one taking care of the animal and doing everything. They just kind of, you guys could pick a week of the month or something, or a week, or a day during the week that they come pick it up.
Right.
Okay, so have you guys ever had any weight issues with your animals while milking? Like, I know that sometimes the lambs or the lambs or the kids will drink so much from mom that they're taking nutrition from mom, and there's weight issues there because mom will start losing weight. Have you guys ever had any issues with that?
I have maybe a little bit with my sheep, but I free graze them on my property. So, and I do supplement with grain and some alfalfa, especially while they're milking, but nothing serious, certainly not with my goats. they're tiny, fat, and hardy, but I do notice, and it's all relative. I mean, their babies are much bigger than the goats because, they're much bigger, but I do find that my lambs, and usually my sheep only have one, my specific type of sheep only have one lamb per season. And just depending on how big they are and how they milk, I have seen my sheep dip with weight a little bit, and I just make sure to supplement them morning and evening.
Yeah, one nice thing about those Nigerian dwarfs, they hold their weight really well. I always say they're like little beach balls,
Yeah.
They're always kind of round and heavy. And I've had some, so again, I'm primarily Nubians, and within my line, so I have 2 different genetic lines. I have the one that started from my original doe, and then I have another line that I brought in a few years ago, and she's from another breeder. And I find a really big difference between the 2 lines, even within the same breed. So I have my own line that I've developed are really hardy. They hold weight really well, even when they're in really big milk production, whereas my other line is much harder to keep weight on. And then I have found that between breeds, it's really different. We raised Oberhaslis for a little while, which is a Swiss breed. So the smallest of the Swiss breed goats. And that breed is notorious for being big, heavy milk producers, and they drop weight, when they're in milk. And so it really varies between breeds, and then it varies within certain lines. And there's almost no way to get weight on a doe who's a good producer when she's in milk, because you can keep supplementing them and feeding them more, and those really good dairy animals will just make more and more milk. They're not going to put any of that supplement toward their own body. And so if you have one of those heavy producers that tends to drop weight, you've got to get that weight on them before they're in milk. Because once they're in milk, you're just going to be feeding milk, until they're not in milk again. So that's one of the things I talk a lot with people about that are going to raise dairy animals, especially if they are in one of those breeds or they're from a line that aren't good about holding weight, is spend time in your off season getting weight back on. So I usually dry my does off by about December, January, and then they're not kidding again until sometime between March and June. And so, or if I have a dry year, I'm going to spend time getting that doe back into her health and weight and get her a little maybe ahead of the curve before she gets into milk again. Because once she's in milk, there won't be much way I can get weight on her. There are some supplements, there's some topical oils that you can add to those does who are really prone to dropping weight, but are huge producers, that may be able to help get a little bit more weight on them. You can add things like sunflower seeds, but a lot of times it's just going to make them produce more milk. So it's really good for those particular animals, and you'll learn that over time. You just can't always tell till they're in milk. Is this going to be one of those does that just really drops weight and produces a ton of milk or not? You'll know a little bit if you know about the genetics of her lineage, but then if you see it, just know that you're going to have to work on that weight issue before you breed them again, or at least before they're in milk again.
And then knowing that you can also figure out if that's what you're looking for, or if that's something you want to breed out of your herd or flock.
That is true, because I am not trying to do maximum milk production. I'd like good producers, but I don't need them to be those heavy milkers. And I prefer my line that they're good producers, but they also hold their weight really well. I feed them a lot less, over the year. And so I feel like, and then I just feel like they look better and they look healthier, and they're maybe a little bit less prone to other things because their body condition stays good. So for me personally, I would sacrifice the heavy milk production by having good milk production, but good body weight along with it. And that's the line I've continued really cultivating, because that's my personal preference.
What about you, Kimmy? Would that be something you're looking for, or would that be something you'd breed out?
No, so because I have no intentions of being a business or distributing my milk, milk production, as long as it's enough for me, the family, the things we want to make, I don't need a heavy milk producer. In fact, the last thing I want to do is produce more milk than we can consume, because there is something so awful once you do start to kind of live that farm life. You realize just how awful it is to be wasteful with the food. Anything from letting the milk spoil or just having too much. And of course you can give milk away and whatnot, but we just don't need that much. I had big plans of milking the miniature cow when I had her, and that didn't work out. We wound up selling her, but we would have never been able to consume all that milk. So,
that's why we make cheese,
yeah.
Because it's a way to make milk smaller and make it last longer, and
Yeah.
when you have too much milk, you can only make so much soap and lotion, which is what we did at first. And then, making cheese, especially aged cheeses, where you're really just using that milk in a very efficient way. Then you're making it much smaller, and you can eat it, for months and years to come. And so that's really why most dairy people eventually are going to turn to cheese, because it is awful to waste that milk. And so, yeah.
And you have to store certain cheeses for a lengthy time. So like you can have cheese basically throughout the entire year, whereas for milk, sometimes you know, the best or the freshest will only be when they're actually in milk.
Exactly. Yeah. So like, you know, if you're making a fresh cheese, like for goat people, you know, Chev is your classic, you know, soft goat milk cheese that's very easy to make, that it only has a pretty short shelf life, but it can be frozen. So you can make that cheese and freeze it and be eating it all year long. Or you can make an aged cheese, you know, like a cheddar or a Gouda or something like that, all of which you can make from any species of milk, even if it's not traditionally made from that species of milk. And then those, well, not only will they last a long time, you just don't get to eat them for a while. They need to age for a few months or some up to a year. So it really does make it so you can prolong the life of your milk and have milk in the off season via your cheese.
Right.
One of the things I've also researched is that you can freeze the milk itself. At least for the sheep, they said from my research that freezing their milk doesn't affect it once you unfreeze it. Is that the same for goat milk too?
Unfortunately, no, not for cheese making. So sheep milk works still just fine after it's been frozen. Goat milk, not so much. It just does some kind of a weird separation thing, and it really changes it in a way that doesn't work very well for making cheese. So, you know, when I do freeze milk, I use that milk for soap making because it works great for that. Or I usually keep some on hand for feeding babies. So if I am short on milk, I always freeze some colostrum every year from my bigger producers who at the beginning are producing more colostrum than their babies need, because then I'll have it for a year where I'm short on colostrum or something happens and mom isn't producing. So the milk will be good for that, but it's not good for cheese making. So it's better to make the cheese and freeze it than to freeze the milk to use for cheese making for goats.
Have you found that's the case, Kimmy, with both your sheep and your goats?
So the sheep milk, absolutely 100%. I freeze and then I will defrost and we will drink it. I'll my son in the mornings and no issues. I do still have to defrost it slowly. And I'll use warm water, or I've tried a few different techniques, but the warm water well. But there's something about the particles in the goat milk. I had done some research because I had messed up quite a few batches of caramels and cheeses and I couldn't figure out what was going on. And once I defrosted the goat milk and really took a look at it, it was clumpy. The whey didn't absorb back into, or the whey and the casein didn't absorb back into one another. So it was just clumpy. And yeah, it was hard to actually make anything out of it except for lotions and soaps and that kind of thing. And even that stuff, I found like my soaps would burn more easily with milk. So yeah, it was really just something better to do fresh. But the sheep milk, no problem.
So for you guys, how long is your milking season on a normal year? Kimmy, I know yours is kind of different now because of the move, but on a normal year, how long would you be milking your animals for?
So this year was very shortened, mainly because of the flood we had. So I got in March, April, and May, and then dried them up after that. But usually they kid sometime in March or April, and I'll go through late October, early November, and then let them rest through the winter and breeding and all that again. So I don't need the milk year round. I like to give the animals a rest. And I don't stage. I know some people will stage where they're drying some of their animals up at certain times, and so they're always able to milk somebody. I've never done that because I need the break too, since I'm doing it by myself. The AM, the PM, getting up early and just So towards the end of the season, I think if I have to sanitize or filter or clean a goat udder or sheep one more time, you know, so I can tell by the end of the season, I'm just as ready as the animals are to take a break. So really just sometime between March and April to October, November.
Yeah, that's generally us too. I mean, we have kidded as early as February in the past, and as late as June or maybe even July. I don't know if I've ever had July kids, but typically in a typical year, I like to start kidding in March, and then I usually am wrapping up milking by about Christmas. I have gone into January. And then I do spread my kidding out a little bit. So I usually like to do March, April, and May and do a few does each month. Part of that was just to spread out the fun. And part of it was also we were doing a lot of tours and people like to see the babies. And so we always had kind of new babies coming along. But then that also helped me to even out kind of my milk production, because usually I'm letting the babies have most of the milk for the first 2 to 3 months. I have a few heavy producers that we're sharing. So, you know, they're nursing and I'm milking them because the babies can't drink all the milk. And so if I didn't also milk them, she would just drop her milk production to meet what the babies are taking, and I might as well keep her milk production up and have some of both. But most of my does, I'm letting the babies have all the milk for the first 2 to 3 months, and then I'm weaning babies, and then I'll have the milk for about 6 months after that. So that usually fits my schedule pretty well, and it tends to be how my does. Nubians are known for not having the longest milk cycle of, you know, the Swiss breeds tend to milk longer between kidding than the Nubians do. So about a 6 to 9 month lactation season is pretty typical for them. I do have them still in milk when I'm breeding, so that's okay. They can be in milk for the first 3 months of their gestation, but the last 2 months they should be dry so that all that energy is going to babies and not depleting it. That's another thing for the moms, you know, don't make them work any harder than they have to when they're making babies and milk. So those last 2 months. And then I really do like to take the winter off and not be milking. It's, you know, it's not that fun to be trudging through a foot of snow and in a milk house when it's -2, you know. So I do try to not be milking in January and February if I can help it.
What's your guys' drying off routine? How do you guys kind of transition from milking twice a day, morning and night, and then to get them to kind of wean off or dry off?
Yeah, so I milk twice a day until usually about September, maybe October. I'm already down to once a day now because I just decided, like, oh, it's starting to get dark a little earlier, and let's see how they do with once a day. And everybody transitioned really well. So that's usually what I do is I start twice a day, then I go to once a day at some point in the fall. And then if I'm just milking and all the babies are weaned, then what I do is I just start spreading out the time. When I'm ready to dry them off, I just spread out the time between milkings. So from once a day, which would be every 24 hours, I'll go to every 36 hours. And when they seem comfortable with that, I'll go to every 48 hours. And then I'll just keep adding a day until I feel like they've reabsorbed and they aren't, you know, getting overly filled back up. Some does you can do that and you're done in a week. And some does it'll take 5 weeks of that gradual process to get them to finally stop producing. Just depends on how heavy of milkers they are.
Yeah, in the past, I've used about anywhere from 4 to 6 weeks to cut them back from twice a day to once a day to once every other day until they're ready. Some do dry up a little faster, and especially when I was milking by hand in seasons prior, it's really easy to tell because you are so familiar with those udders. You can put your hand on it and you can know how they are, and besides just visually looking. But I've always been very afraid of either me not doing it correctly and then getting sick from it, or getting an infection. So I've always taken my time with it and really drug it out. Plus, it's kind of, like I said, I get towards the end of the season where I am ready to, but it's bittersweet because, you know, that part's over. So, you know, I drag it out a little longer, but I haven't had any issues with drying them up so far.
Yeah, the other thing I would just add to that, like you were saying, Kimmy, of paying attention and keeping, you know, seeing what's happening, even with does where you have babies on them full time, you still want to be keeping an eye on them, because at some point those babies might just wean themselves, and then you're thinking everything's getting taken care of, and you come out and that mom is totally engorged. And then you have some babies that will never wean themselves, and mamas that will never kick them off. I have a yearling that I still see out there sneaking sips, and her mom didn't even have milk this year. I mean, she didn't have babies. And I'm like, I don't know what's still in there that you think you're getting. But, and that's that mama that will never kick her babies off. Whereas I have maybe she's 4.5 months old right now, doeling, that I left with mom because I had enough milk. And then I just noticed in the last few weeks, like, mom, you're looking kind of full there. And sure enough, that baby is just done. And if you weren't paying attention, you could miss it. You know, you think that it's all being taken care of, and then baby just decided I'm done, and you've got to pay attention. And that's the same at the beginning. Just because your babies are nursing full time, you got to keep a really close eye on those udders, because sometimes those babies just cannot nearly keep up with the amount that doe is producing. And you've got to be helping out, or you're going to be asking for mastitis, right? Because they're going to get engorged, and they're going to get, so it isn't like you're off the hook if you're leaving mamas and babies together. You still have to be keeping a pretty close eye on things. And then I'm with you, Kimmy. It's always bittersweet at the end. It's like, I love that part, and yet I'm ready for a break. So I sometimes stretch it out a bit too. Or I'll keep one. Like, I'm just gonna keep one in milk, and everybody else is getting dried off.
Right.
I know there's also the issue too of like babies favoring one side of the other than the other. So like they'll be sucking on one side and the other one's getting engorged because they're not switching. So I just wanted to I've not done that personally, but I know that has happened. So I wanted to throw that one out there too.
And almost always that happens. I can tell you, I've had very few babies that are nursing as evenly as I would be milking. And in fact, it's one of the reasons that I often do like to pull babies at a certain point and bottle feed them, is that I do have a little better control then, especially for show goats. I have a little bit of better control over that udder development being a little more even, because babies just almost always, even if you have twins, they both like the same side, and that side gets all the action and the other side doesn't. And you do have to definitely keep an eye.
So one of the questions I see a lot is people always are asking, what does goat milk taste like, or what does sheep milk taste like? So from your guys' point of view, how do you describe how the difference between, cow, goat, sheep milk?
I would say, to be very honest, I prefer the sheep's milk. My husband and my son prefer the goat milk. I think that the sheep milk is a mild, almost woolly flavor. That's the only way I can describe it. There's like a clean smell to the sheep that you don't get with the goats. Even when I'm milking them and stuff, there's just like a clean wool smell. And I have hair sheep, but that's the only way I can think to describe it. And it's more of a mellow flavor, where the goats, and I keep my bucks separate, so my females don't have his scent on them, but the goat milk is just a little more tangy in comparison. I noticed that if you keep the females with the male, with the goats, especially with the buck, he's trying to impress them the whole time. So he's got his odor going on and ultimately rubs up against the female, and that translates into the milk. And that's when you get that really strong goat flavor where people say, oh, I don't like goat milk. It's usually because the female's been kept with the male. So my milk doesn't taste like that, but it is just slightly tangier. But I find them both to be like rich, just as rich as cow milk. And in fact, there's just more to me, especially because I've always had store-bought cow milk, to me, there's more of a flavor profile with my sheep and my goat milk. So that's just my
Yeah,
opinion.
I would agree. I mean, I always say like store-bought cow milk is kind of like flavorless, and then everything else kind of compares to it. I mean, I like store-bought cow milk, and I grew up on, 2% or 1% milk. So for me, sheep milk and good quality, Nubian or Nigerian dwarf goat milk, it's not so much the flavor difference as just the fat, that it's like drinking ice cream. It's so rich and so high in butter fat comparatively. But if you grew up on, full whole cow milk, depending on the breed, you might be more used to that mouthfeel and that high butter fat content. But I would say the flavor difference with goat milk in particular is varies by a number of factors. One is breed. And so the breed of goat will make a difference in how that flavor is. And so many times people come to my classes and taste the milk. And I used to do all these little milk tests with them, and give them 3 or 4 different things. Some is cow milk, some is goat milk, some's different breed of goat milk, and have people guess. And a lot of times people couldn't tell the difference between my Nubian milk and the cow milk, because Nubian milk is typically very mild. It's like a really good high fat cow milk. But that varies between breeds. I would say the Nubians and Nigerian dwarfs tend to have the sweeter milks. La Manchas and Oberhaslis probably are next. And then I would say the Saanens and Alpines and Toggenburgs tend to have that more goaty flavor that people think of. But even within a breed, you'll have different does that have different flavors of milk. Then what the doe is eating will affect things. So if they're on grass pasture versus alfalfa hay, that's going to change the flavor. And then the big thing that I notice more than anything is the time we are in the lactation cycle. So it's very rich at the beginning. It's much more like cow's milk in the middle. And then at the end of the milk season, the goat milk gets really goaty. And I call it wonky. It's just the only way I can describe it. Late season goat milk just gets wonky. And, by about November, December, a lot of it is changing a lot in flavor, in color, in texture. And a lot of that has to do with the hormonal changes in the doe at that point in the year. Some of it has to do with just the change in the light and the season and your grazing, grasses. Although since my does are mostly eating dry hay, I think it's much less having to do with that than it is with hormonal changes. And then it's weird. It doesn't make good cheese, and it's got this wonky flavor, and that's when I'm done. I say, okay, this is for soap now, and we're drying you off because this milk just turned too wonky. And then I totally agree with Kimmy. You just don't want your bucks running with your does. No matter what other people might tell you, you will know it. It's just gonna make your milk taste like a buck.
I'm assuming pasteurization and raw would also affect the taste a little bit as well.
It does. And some people really, really prefer that raw milk flavor. It's more complex for sure. And then some people are just so used to pasteurized milk that the raw milk flavor is a little too much going on for them. So I have people on both sides of the fence. Now, higher temperature pasteurization, I think, really makes milk taste lousy. So, keeping your pasteurization temperatures lower, it tends to make it metallic almost tasting when it gets really high temperature. But most of us that are home pasteurizing are doing it at a much lower level. And then I feel like it just makes it more like what most of us were used to drinking, pasteurized milk. But I do know people who love that raw milk flavor and would never dream of pasteurizing milk. So it's just a personal preference.
So I see that we're coming up on 2 hours. This has been so much fun. Do you guys have any last things you want to say? Feel free to share business or any social media that you want people to follow you on. But if you guys could just kind of do maybe a lasting comment, as well as sharing your info, that'd be great. And we'll start with Kate.
All right. So, yes, my website is theartofcheese.com. And there is a link on that website to my farm under the About key. I used to keep two separate websites and decided that really wasn't necessary. So most of my energy is toward the cheese making school. So you'll find a lot of information there. But you can also find a little bit about the goats. And I do both, of course, teach cheese making, and I do sell dairy goats. Typically, I only sell babies. It's very rare that I am selling a milker, because by the time they've made it to that point in my herd, it's because I wanted to keep them. But I do take reservations for babies if people are interested in Nubians. And the last thing I guess I would say is going back to what at the very beginning Kimmy said, which, and both of you said, in fact, which is you kind of have to learn from trial and error. And I think, you know, starting out rather small, I would think is a good idea, so you don't get overwhelmed. So, you know, start with one doe and a companion if you're going to do milking animals. Don't start with a whole herd or flock and then get in over your head, both financially and just from a time and learning curve standpoint. You're going to have to do it. And so getting a mentor of some kind, somebody that can help you with go-to questions, even if it's just social media. So my social media, I have Instagram is The Art of Cheese Longmont, and Facebook is just Art of Cheese. I also have a Briargate Farm Facebook page. So reaching out to people, even if your mentor is in another state. You know, I mentor a guy in Missouri right now who's going to eventually buy goats from me. I mean, he's going to drive all the way from Missouri to Colorado to get his goats, even though I told him I could find him goats in Missouri. But I've become a kind of mentor for him over time. And I think you can find somebody, but do find a real person, not just a book. They can help you through answering your questions, because you will have them no matter how much reading you've done. In real time, you're going to have questions. So finding those people that already have been through some of the trial and error, they can help you as you're learning, will make it a much more enjoyable process for you.
And one of the things I've loved about just the farm community, but just especially in the ruminants, is that it's not a large group. And so everyone is so open to sharing. I mean, I myself reached out to you guys, and you guys were so open to hop on here. So like, don't be afraid to just kind of contact someone that you admire or you respect and ask questions, because I haven't found anyone that I've tried to contact who's like, don't talk to me. You know, they're always, some of them are like, you know, we don't really do social stuff. So like, we don't even really respond to emails because we're just backwoods farm, you know, off grid for the most part. So like, sometimes you get that where it's just hard to contact them. But for the most part, I've never had an interaction where people weren't super, super helpful. So,
I think you're right about that. You know, having been in the horse world before I got into ruminants, there's a very big difference. I mean, there are some nice horse people, but you know, horse people don't share the way goat and sheep people do. Small homesteaders that are raising, you know, chickens or goats or sheep, they're just so much more open and willing to help each other. And so I would really echo that.
all right, Kimmy, you want to do your last little spiel?
So you can find me on Instagram at Brandley_farms and Facebook at Brandley Farms. We are just a hobby farm. We are making a big move to California, so you can follow us along on the journey. We will be setting up our farm once we get there. So you can kind of see all the shenanigans that go along. We have 5 dogs. We have a 2-year-old, another baby on the way in January. So our hands are completely full, but we like it that way. We keep chickens and ducks and all kinds of other fun things. I would say the biggest piece of advice I could give, especially as someone who did not grow up on a farm, who knew nothing, but just had a passion for animals and a very tolerant husband, is do your research. Get set up with all the important things. So where I was located currently, we didn't have a vet anywhere around. I called some of these out in the country vets who said, no, we see horses, but we won't see your goats, or we won't see your sheep. And I was kind of dumbfounded because I just assumed they were in a country, rural part of the state that they would definitely see those animals. And when you bring an animal home, it's so important that you have proper care put in place for them. You know, these are not just, whether you use them as a business or as your pets, they deserve to be cared for well. So make sure the infrastructure's in place, your fencing, their shelter, you're going to know what you want to feed them. You're going to know how much you're going to feed them. You're going to have a vet in place if they get sick. Those kind of things before you just go on Craigslist or go to somebody's Facebook page and bring home an adorable little animal. Keep in mind that they do get bigger, because I have sold my babies before, and I've had some people with these crazy ideas that they're going to have these little tiny kids in pajamas for the next few years. They get bigger, so you've got to want the whole package, not just the cute little baby. You have to be on board for the whole process. So just research, know what you're going to do, and then don't be afraid. Go out there and get them. I mean, everybody I knew thought I was crazy when I said I was bringing goats and sheep and mini cows home, and but don't be afraid. Do your research and then go out there and do it. We do have a great farm community. Instagram, Facebook, I've always found very nice people who have been on there to help. I follow some really knowledgeable people who I look at and say, oh man, they're doing it this way, and I notate that, and maybe I'll try it for next season. So don't be afraid. If it's something you want to do, go for it.
Perfect. Thank you guys. Thank you, Kimmy and Kate, so much for doing this. This was like everything I wanted it to be. Because it was just an amazing talk. We covered a whole lot. And so I just appreciate you guys spending the time with me to answer these questions and to talk to our audience about just getting started and all the intricacies of milk itself. So thank you guys so much for being here.
It was fun.
Yeah, thank you for doing it. I'm impressed with your organization and your drive. That's great.
Thank you. Thank you.